The Threxians had long considered themselves masters of conquest, their empire spanning countless worlds, each one falling effortlessly to their superior technology and unmatched military force. They had subjugated entire civilizations without breaking a sweat, crushing any resistance with their advanced weapons and impenetrable shields. To them, Earth was just another backwater planet, inhabited by a species barely worth acknowledging. Their invasion plans were straightforward: land, neutralize any resistance, and establish control. They expected the whole operation to be over in a matter of hours. The invasion began with a brutal efficiency. Threxian warships appeared in Earth's skies, blotting out the sun with their massive, angular shapes. From beneath their metallic hulls, smaller assault crafts descended, depositing waves of armored Threxian soldiers in the heart of major cities around the globe. The cities were thrown into chaos. Sirens wailed as buildings trembled from the force of the alien landings. The Threxians were ready to face some form of organized military resistance, perhaps tanks, fighter jets, or even crude attempts at missile strikes. But what they encountered was disorganized, panicked chaos. The humans were scrambling. Their communication networks overloaded, civilians were fleeing in all directions, and local police and military forces were woefully unprepared for an attack of this magnitude. Threxian soldiers, encased in their sleek black armor and wielding plasma rifles, marched through the streets like unstoppable machines. Energy shields shimmered around them, making bullets and explosives bounce off harmlessly. They cut down anything in their path with ruthless precision, moving deeper into the heart of each city, confident that this invasion would be no different than the countless others they had orchestrated across the galaxy. But then something unexpected happened. As the alien forces pressed on, they began to notice pockets of resistance that didn't match the chaos they had expected. It wasn't the human military that was pushing back. It was the civilians. At first, the Threxians barely registered it. A group of unarmed humans threw rocks and bricks at them, seemingly in desperation. The soldiers activated their shields, watching as the projectiles bounced off harmlessly. A plasma burst in return scattered the humans. Business as usual. However, the further the Threxians moved, the more resistance they encountered, and it wasn't just the panicked flailing of an unprepared species. Humans were starting to adapt. Quickly. In one sector, a group of construction workers turned their equipment into makeshift weapons. A wrecking ball swung down from a crane, catching a Threxian walker mid-stride and smashing it into the ground, disabling it in an instant. Another walker, moving through a construction site, found its legs trapped in hastily strewn cables, causing it to tumble to the ground, where humans swarmed it like ants, prying open its armor with crowbars and sledgehammers. The Threxian command, watching from orbit, dismissed these incidents as flukes, primitive displays of desperation from a species that had no chance of survival. They underestimated the human capacity for adaptation, the way humans could transform their surroundings into a weapon in a matter of minutes. More worrying reports began to trickle in. In one instance, a Threxian scout ship was brought down by a group of civilians who had set up a makeshift slingshot using telephone wires and debris. They launched broken concrete and scrap metal into the ship's intake, causing it to crash land into a nearby park. The soldiers aboard were met by humans wielding kitchen knives, hammers, and anything else they could get their hands on. This wasn't normal. The Threxians had expected to fight a battle of superior technology against a hopelessly outmatched opponent. Instead, they were fighting a species that could turn anything into a weapon. The Threxians didn't understand the human mindset, how, when cornered, humans would use whatever they had, no matter how ridiculous or seemingly harmless, to fight back. And it wasn't just isolated groups of civilians anymore. Soon, the reports of resistance were coming in from every city. Humans were creating traps using anything they could find: broken furniture, abandoned cars, and even their own homes. Streets became death traps, with humans using water to short-circuit Threxian energy shields or setting off makeshift explosions using household chemicals. In one small town, a group of civilians managed to disable an entire platoon of Threxian soldiers using nothing but a fire truck, hoses, and dish soap. The high-pressure water, mixed with the soap, had made the streets slippery, causing the Threxians to lose their footing and fall as they struggled to move through the now slick environment. Their energy shields flickered under the constant barrage of water, and before they could regroup, civilians armed with garden tools and even lawnmowers overwhelmed them. The sight of an alien soldier being taken down by a human using a leaf blower would have been absurd if it hadn't been so deadly. The Threxians had no frame of reference for this kind of warfare. Their enemies in past conquests had always fought with dignity, traditional weapons, organized defenses, and calculated strategies. The humans, on the other hand, were chaotic, unpredictable, and worst of all, resourceful. Everything on Earth, from broken beer bottles to playground equipment, was being turned into a weapon. The Threxian commanders, still believing in their technological superiority, pressed on, ordering their troops to continue the invasion. After all, they had come too far to turn back now. But the further their forces advanced, the worse things became. Alien soldiers walking down streets found themselves pelted with makeshift projectiles launched from windows or balconies. Human civilians, using trash cans, buckets of nails, and even spare tires, created impromptu barricades, slowing down the alien advance. Where plasma rifles and energy shields failed, the humans turned to their environment, using fire escapes, rooftops, and underground tunnels to launch surprise attacks. In some cases, humans used stray dogs as distractions, sending them running through Threxian patrols while they prepared to ambush the aliens from behind. Every city had become a battlefield of absurdity. Threxian walkers were brought down by tripwires made from clothing lines, their legs tangled in the chaos of the urban environment. Drones sent to survey areas for resistance were met with volleys of fireworks, launched by children who had taken to the streets with reckless glee. Threxian troops, once confident in their superior armor and tactics, were now hesitating to move forward, unsure of what the humans would throw at them next. It wasn't just the randomness of the human resistance that threw them off, it was the sheer creativity. Back on the Threxian mothership, the commanders were beginning to realize that they had miscalculated badly. They had prepared for war against an inferior species, one that would be easily cowed by their advanced technology. Instead, they had stepped into a battlefield where everything, was a weapon. And they were losing control. The panic was starting to set in, though none of them would admit it yet. Their greatest mistake had been underestimating the humans. The longer the invasion dragged on, the more the Threxians began to feel the full weight of their miscalculation. What had initially seemed like an easy conquest was now spiraling out of control. They couldn't understand how humans, primitive, technologically inferior, and chaotic, were able to hold their own against the most powerful military force in the galaxy. Reports from the ground told of increasing alien losses, not because of overwhelming firepower or organized military resistance, but because humans were using everything around them as weapons. Alien commanders attempted to regroup, deploying more heavily armored units and concentrating their firepower on key human strongholds. They figured that if they could concentrate their forces, they would eventually overwhelm the resistance. But as the Threxians reorganized their tactics, the humans adapted even faster. In one city, a group of alien soldiers found themselves under siege not by military forces, but by civilians armed with nothing more than household tools and raw ingenuity. Humans had begun creating booby traps in abandoned buildings, using mundane items like kitchen appliances and furniture. They had rigged microwaves to explode, filled bathtubs with flammable liquids, and set up pressure plates using floorboards. When the alien soldiers entered these seemingly empty structures, they were caught completely off guard by the sheer inventiveness of the humans. The panic among the Threxian ground forces grew. They were trained to expect enemies who would follow certain rules of engagement, who would retreat when faced with superior firepower. But humans didn't fight like that. When the Threxians set up barricades, humans dismantled them with crowbars and hammers. When they established strongholds, humans used civilian vehicles as battering rams to breach their defenses. Every time the aliens thought they had contained the situation, the humans would strike from an unexpected angle. In another city, a group of civilians had managed to commandeer an alien tank. The Threxians had left it unattended for just a moment, assuming that no human would know how to operate such advanced technology. But humans, curious and stubborn by nature, had figured it out within minutes. They drove the tank through the alien front lines, using it to cause chaos and disrupt Threxian formations. It wasn't long before the humans inside had figured out how to fire the tank's plasma cannons, adding to the alien losses. The Threxian commanders received increasingly bizarre reports. One described a group of children who had managed to disable a Threxian communications relay using nothing but remote-controlled toy cars outfitted with nails and makeshift explosives. Another report detailed how a group of elderly humans, too slow to flee, had used a set of dominoes, string, and kitchen knives to create a lethal trap that took out an entire squad of Threxian infantry. Every time the Threxians tried to push forward, they encountered a new and entirely unexpected form of resistance. The Threxian forces weren't just facing resistance from an organized military, they were facing an entire population of civilians, each of whom was turning their surroundings into an arsenal. The aliens were used to precision and efficiency. They relied on their advanced weapons and shields, their military doctrine, and their strict control of the battlefield. But humans didn't play by those rules. To humans, everything was a potential tool for survival. Nothing was off-limits. The Threxians had come to conquer, but they had never considered that they might be fighting against an entire planet full of people who saw opportunity in every object around them. And then there were the environmental challenges. In the heat of battle, the Threxians had overlooked the human understanding of their own terrain. Alien soldiers attempting to march through cities were met with humans who had turned their surroundings into a war zone. Streets were flooded with water to create hazards for the aliens' energy shields. Industrial pipes were rerouted to spray hot steam into key thoroughfares, blocking Threxian paths. Civilians sabotaged power grids to create electrical traps, knowing full well how to manipulate their own infrastructure to gain an advantage. In one area, a small group of civilians had taken control of a construction site and turned it into a fortress. They used the site's heavy machinery to move rubble and block alien access points. They placed debris in strategic locations to funnel alien forces into choke points, where they ambushed them with construction tools and makeshift weapons. The Threxian soldiers, used to battles fought with precision and advanced weaponry, were completely unprepared for the unpredictability of these attacks. Human adaptability wasn't just physical, it was psychological. The Threxians were used to overwhelming their enemies, breaking their will to fight. But the humans seemed to thrive on chaos. With every setback, humans grew more determined, more creative. They seemed to take pride in finding new ways to turn the tide of the battle, as though each unconventional attack was a victory in itself. And the Threxians couldn't predict what humans would do next. The alien commanders were growing desperate. In another region, Threxian ground troops tried to secure a stronghold, thinking they had finally found a foothold in the chaos. But as they fortified their position, they began to hear a strange sound, loud music, echoing from the distance. At first, they dismissed it as another strange human custom. But then the attacks began. Humans, armed with nothing more than fireworks and fireworks launchers, began bombarding the Threxian stronghold with relentless, colorful explosions. The sound, the smoke, and the confusion disoriented the Threxians, who had no idea what was happening. In the confusion, humans breached the stronghold's perimeter, using everyday objects, steel pipes, crowbars, and baseball bats, to take down the alien soldiers one by one. These incidents were not isolated. Every city, every town, and every rural area seemed to come up with its own methods for fighting back. Humans used farm tools, athletic equipment, even musical instruments to create distractions and attacks. They turned their homes into fortresses and their neighborhoods into war zones. Threxian drones sent to scout human positions were swatted down with tennis rackets or blinded by laser pointers. Civilians filled public fountains with soap, making the ground slippery and impossible for the heavily armored Threxian soldiers to navigate. The Threxians had never encountered this kind of resistance. Other species had fought with honor, with tactics that were understandable. But humans were unpredictable, turning the entire planet into a death trap. The Threxian commanders tried to counter these attacks, deploying more troops and increasing firepower, but it only seemed to make things worse. The more they pushed, the more humans found new ways to fight back. In the Threxian command center, the reports were becoming more and more frantic. Entire platoons were being wiped out by civilians using nothing but tools found in their garages. Advanced Threxian walkers were being tripped by strategically placed street signs. Communications arrays were being disabled by humans using garden hoses and power washers. The Threxians, with all their technology and military prowess, were being systematically undone by the sheer inventiveness of the humans. The Threxian commanders finally began to realize the depth of their mistake. They had entered this war thinking that they were facing another primitive species that would fall in line once their military was crushed. They hadn't anticipated that humans would turn their entire environment into a weapon. The humans didn't need plasma rifles or energy shields. They had trash cans, ladders, and kitchen sinks, and they were using them with deadly effectiveness. The panic began to spread. Threxian soldiers, once confident in their invincibility, were now second-guessing every move. Every object, every street corner, every human was a potential threat. And the humans weren't just fighting back, they were enjoying it. The Threxians, for the first time in their long history of conquest, were losing not because of superior firepower, but because they couldn't outthink the humans' relentless creativity. As the Threxian command continued to receive reports of their mounting failures, they became increasingly desperate. They had sent their most elite troops, their best technology, and yet, they were being undone by humans wielding anything they could get their hands on. The sheer unpredictability of human tactics was a nightmare for a species that thrived on precise calculations and flawless strategies. In one report, a squad of Threxian soldiers had been trapped in an underground parking garage. They had expected a human ambush, perhaps a conventional firefight, but what they got was entirely different. The humans had flooded the area, knee-deep in water, which would have been a minor inconvenience under normal circumstances. But then the lights went out, and the power grid in the entire block was deliberately overloaded by the humans. The electrical surge sent thousands of volts coursing through the water, frying the Threxians' energy shields and incapacitating them within seconds. No weapons were fired, no direct combat engaged. The humans had used the environment itself as a weapon, taking out an entire platoon without even being seen. Elsewhere, in a small coastal town, Threxians advancing through a fishing village found themselves suddenly overwhelmed. At first, the human resistance had seemed minimal, just a few civilians with simple weapons. Then, the nets came. Fishermen, using the tools of their trade, entangled the Threxian soldiers in a web of heavy fishing nets. The Threxians, unprepared for this type of attack, struggled to free themselves. The humans didn't stop there. They hurled harpoons, used boat anchors to trip the aliens, and dumped crates of ice to make the terrain impassable. The advanced alien infantry units were left scrambling, trying to escape a situation they had never trained for. They weren't fighting a conventional army. They were fighting civilians who saw every part of their surroundings as a tool for resistance. Back in the Threxian mothership, the alien commanders were frantically searching for answers. They had never encountered anything like this before. Their previous conquests had been straightforward. Superior firepower and advanced technology had always been enough to subdue any species they encountered. But humans were turning every single object, no matter how mundane, into a weapon. The commanders' carefully laid plans were unraveling because their soldiers couldn't predict what humans would do next. In fact, even the Threxian analysts struggled to understand how humans thought. Their logic was unconventional, and their creativity in warfare bordered on madness. The Threxian High Command, faced with the unthinkable, ordered a full review of their invasion tactics. They needed to adapt quickly if they were going to regain control of the situation. Their first move was to deploy more sophisticated drones, ones equipped with advanced sensors to detect human ambushes before they happened. The drones were designed to scan for hidden traps, improvised explosives, and even to map out urban environments in real time to provide ground troops with better intelligence. But the humans adapted just as quickly. The drones became a new target for their ingenuity. Civilians began using handheld mirrors to blind the drone's sensors, confusing them and sending them crashing into buildings. Others used slingshots, throwing rocks or marbles to take out the drone's cameras, rendering them useless. In one particularly creative move, a group of kids used an old hot air balloon to create an electromagnetic field strong enough to disable a swarm of drones hovering over a city. The drones fell out of the sky like dead birds, their advanced systems fried by nothing more than a few household items and some clever thinking. The Threxian ground forces were growing increasingly frustrated. Their armor, designed to withstand energy blasts and projectile weapons, was now vulnerable to attacks they had never even considered. They had been trained for traditional warfare, against tanks, artillery, and other advanced weapons, but the humans were throwing everything at them, from lawnmowers to industrial machinery. One group of soldiers was brought to a standstill when humans sabotaged a construction site, sending tons of rubble and debris crashing down on them. Another squad found itself trapped in an amusement park, where civilians had turned the rides into makeshift traps. The spinning rides disoriented the aliens, and before they could regain their bearings, humans pelted them with rocks, fireworks, and other debris. As the chaos continued, the Threxians began to realize they were fighting a battle they couldn't win. Every move they made was met with an unexpected response. Human adaptability was like nothing they had ever seen. To them, warfare was about order, about using technology and superior firepower to crush the enemy. But the humans? They thrived in disorder. They embraced chaos. And they were winning because of it. The more the Threxians pushed, the more inventive the humans became. In rural areas, farmers began using their tractors and other agricultural equipment to plow through alien infantry. In urban environments, construction workers used cranes to drop heavy loads on top of advancing Threxian armor units. It was as if every single human, no matter where they were or what they had, could find a way to turn their surroundings into a weapon. And they did it with a level of determination and creativity that the Threxians simply couldn't match. In the cities, humans took over radio stations, broadcasting messages to organize resistance and share tactics. They coordinated attacks, not with sophisticated military technology, but with old-school guerrilla warfare tactics. Messages were spread using coded signals, graffiti, and even simple hand gestures. Civilians began to unite in ways the Threxians hadn't anticipated. They weren't just fighting for survival, they were fighting to protect their homes, their families, and their way of life. And they were doing it with an intensity that the alien invaders hadn't planned for. The turning point came when the Threxians tried to consolidate their forces for a final push. They gathered their remaining ground troops into a heavily fortified position, hoping to create an impenetrable defensive line. But once again, the humans struck with unrelenting creativity. Using nothing more than a series of abandoned cars, propane tanks, and a well-placed electrical surge, they created an explosion that ripped through the Threxian defenses, leaving their lines shattered. The Threxians were now in full retreat. Their war machines, once thought invincible, were being dismantled by humans wielding everything from kitchen utensils to street signs. Alien troops, who had never known defeat, were now running for their lives, unsure of what the humans would use against them next. In every corner of the battlefield, the humans had turned everyday objects into weapons of war, and they did so with a speed and ingenuity that left the Threxians terrified. Reports of failure continued to pour in. Alien ships were being taken down by human sabotage, their engines disabled by humans who had figured out how to hack into their systems using little more than basic tools and a bit of ingenuity. Entire battalions were lost because they couldn't predict the next attack. The humans had made it clear, anything and everything was a weapon in their hands, and no amount of alien technology could stop them. The Threxians, for the first time in their history of conquest, were beginning to panic. They had never faced a species like humanity, a species that could turn a harmless object into a deadly weapon, a species that refused to surrender, a species that seemed to grow stronger the more desperate the situation became. The Threxians had expected to crush Earth in days, but now, they were facing an enemy that defied everything they thought they knew about warfare. It wasn't just that humans were clever, it was that their entire approach to survival was different. The Threxians had come expecting a traditional war, but the humans had turned their world into a battlefield where every street, every building, and every object was a threat. And in the face of that relentless ingenuity, the Threxians found themselves outmatched. The realization hit the Threxian High Command like a cold wave. They had underestimated humanity, and now they were paying the price. The invasion was falling apart, and they were running out of time. The full weight of the human resistance had finally broken the Threxians. What had begun as a confident invasion was now a frantic scramble to retreat. Alien soldiers, once proud and disciplined, now fled in disorder, their rigid command structure collapsing under the relentless pressure of human ingenuity. Every street corner, every building, and every vehicle had been weaponized against them. And despite their superior technology, the Threxians had been outmaneuvered by a species that turned unpredictability into their greatest strength. Back on the Threxian mothership, chaos reigned. The alien commanders, who had once thought this invasion would be a simple matter of overwhelming the primitive humans, were now desperately searching for a way out. Communications from their ground forces were disjointed and panicked, filled with descriptions of bizarre human tactics and an endless list of unexpected losses. The Threxians had assumed their superior firepower would dominate, but now, as they faced a series of unexplainable failures, they realized their technological advantage had been rendered irrelevant. The humans had transformed the very fabric of their environment into weapons of war. Even as the Threxians attempted to regroup and fortify their positions, the humans adapted faster than they could react. Civilians flooded the streets, using whatever they could find. Everything was a tool for survival. Children used slingshots to target alien drones, while mechanics turned scrap metal and old electronics into jamming devices that disrupted Threxian communications. An army of improvisers had risen, and the Threxians had no answer to it. As the alien forces tried to pull back to their dropships, they found themselves ambushed at every turn. Roads that should have been clear were blocked by overturned cars, strategically placed to funnel the retreating forces into narrow alleyways where humans waited with makeshift weapons. People used garden hoses, sports equipment, and even baking ingredients to disorient and attack the Threxians. In one instance, a group of civilians flooded a parking structure, then electrified the water with jury-rigged power lines, taking down an entire platoon of alien soldiers without firing a single shot. The Threxians, who had never encountered this kind of chaotic warfare, were in full retreat. But their attempts to escape were thwarted at every turn. Threxian walkers were disabled by humans throwing ropes and chains into their joints. Alien vehicles were hijacked and turned against their former owners, driven by humans who had quickly figured out how to bypass the Threxian control systems. Entire units were wiped out in ambushes that seemed to come from nowhere, as humans used their knowledge of the urban landscape to outmaneuver the invaders at every opportunity. The Threxians, used to structured, predictable battles, were overwhelmed by the sheer unpredictability of the humans. There were no rules, no patterns to follow. Every time the aliens thought they had the humans figured out, the humans shifted tactics, finding new ways to turn their surroundings into weapons. Even the most harmless objects became deadly in the hands of people fighting for their lives. In the final stages of the retreat, the Threxians attempted to regroup near their extraction points, hoping to evacuate what remained of their forces. But the humans weren't about to let them go easily. As the dropships prepared to land, civilians launched an assault using everything at their disposal. They filled the skies with fireworks, confusing the Threxian sensors, while others used slingshots to fire ball bearings into the dropship engines, causing them to stall. When one dropship managed to land, it was quickly surrounded by humans using construction cranes to drop heavy containers onto the alien troops, crushing them before they could board. The panic within the Threxian ranks spread like wildfire. Their once unshakable confidence had crumbled, replaced by the grim realization that they couldn't defeat an enemy like this. The humans didn't need advanced technology or sophisticated weapons. They only needed what was around them. The very planet itself had become a weapon, and the Threxians were woefully outmatched. In one last desperate move, the Threxian High Command ordered their remaining ships to initiate a full-scale withdrawal. The invasion had failed, spectacularly. They had underestimated not only the resilience of humanity, but also their capacity to innovate under pressure. The humans had turned everything the Threxians thought they knew about warfare upside down. They had fought not with superior technology, but with ingenuity, adaptability, and a refusal to back down. As the Threxian ships began their ascent back into the sky, the remnants of their ground forces scrambled to board, but it was too late for many. Human resistance fighters, who had repurposed alien equipment, fired at the fleeing ships with captured Threxian weapons. Others used catapults, launching debris at the retreating forces, while more creative fighters hijacked alien hovercrafts and flew them into the departing ships, causing damage from within. The final moments of the invasion were chaos. The Threxian fleet, once a symbol of their galactic dominance, was now a disorganized mess. Ships took off in different directions, abandoning their comrades in a desperate bid for survival. On the ground, the humans had reclaimed their cities, and the alien forces were no longer a threat. What had started as a swift invasion had turned into a humiliating defeat for the Threxians, all because they had failed to understand the one thing that made humans truly dangerous. Everything, no matter how small or insignificant, was a weapon in their hands. As the last Threxian ship disappeared into the sky, the humans stood victorious. There was no grand celebration, no parade. They were exhausted, battered, and bruised, but they had won. They had done what no other species had managed to do, turn back an advanced alien invasion using nothing more than their wits and whatever they could find. Back on the Threxian homeworld, the news of the defeat sent shockwaves through the Empire. The Threxians, once thought to be unbeatable, had been humbled by a species they had dismissed as primitive. The High Command scrambled to cover up the details of the invasion, not wanting word to spread that their forces had been brought to their knees by civilians using kitchen appliances, sporting equipment, and farming tools. But the truth couldn't be hidden for long. Whispers spread throughout the galaxy about humanity, a species so unpredictable, so adaptable, that even the most advanced alien military had been forced to retreat in disgrace. In the end, the Threxians knew they could never return to Earth. Humans were far too dangerous, not because of their weapons, but because of their minds. They turned the simplest things into deadly tools. Their creativity knew no bounds, and they fought with a tenacity that the Threxians had never seen before. For humanity, this victory was a testament to their spirit. They had faced an enemy far superior in every measurable way, and yet they had prevailed. Their strength wasn't in their technology, but in their ability to turn anything, everything, into a weapon. The Threxians had learned the hard way that humans were not to be underestimated, and that the only rule humans followed in war was simple: survival. As the dust settled, the humans began to rebuild. But they never forgot the lesson the invasion had taught them. In the hands of humanity, anything could be a weapon. And that made them the most dangerous species in the galaxy.